Did you ever get blamed for something you didn't do, just because you were easy to blame?
I can still picture that ordinary Tuesday evening in my cozy Chicago apartment, where the aroma of fresh brewed coffee mingled with the faint hum of city traffic filtering through the slightly ajar window. When my phone suddenly vibrated insistently on the granite kitchen countertop, its screen illuminating with the simple yet ominous word, Dad, that instantly transported me back to countless tense family dinners in our modest Dayton home, where his authoritative voice had always dominated. Discussions about finances, futures, and the unyielding expectations he placed on his two daughters, and as I hesitated for a split second before answering, steeling myself against the inevitable lecture that seemed to lurk in every call from him these days, his tone erupted through the speaker without any preliminary small talk, demanding in that gravelly baritone honed from years managing factory shifts why I had yet to confirm my attendance at Lisa's upcoming wedding, framing it not as a joyful family gathering, but as an absolute obligation tied directly to his ongoing financial support for my education. And then came the ultimatum that hit like a freight train barreling through the quiet routine of my evening. His words slicing sharply through the line as he declared that if I dared to skip the event for any reason whatsoever, he would immediately cease all tuition payments, leaving me to fend for myself amid mounting student loans and the uncertainty of an unfinished degree, a threat that carried the weight of his lifelong pattern of using money as a tool to enforce compliance. Reminiscent of the time in my early 20s when he had withheld my allowance until I agreed to forego a summer internship in favor of helping at his annual neighborhood block party, prioritizing his image of a dutiful family over my budding ambitions in the tech world. Yet, sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, my free hand absently tracing the rim of my mug as steam curled upward in lazy spirals, I suppressed a wry smile because he had absolutely no inkling of the monumental secret I had been safeguarding for nearly 6 months now, the one where I had meticulously completed my online business administration program ahead of schedule, graduating with highest honors from a reputable university that would have made him beam with pride if only he had known, all while securing a lucrative remote consulting position with a cutting-edge Silicon Valley firm that compensated me with a six-figure salary right from the start, allowing me to build a nest egg substantial enough to cover not just my living expenses, but also investments in stocks and a modest retirement fund that already outpaced what most of his poker-playing buddies had amassed after decades of blue-collar toil. It was not that I had intended to deceive him indefinitely, but after enduring years of his dismissive comments about my choice of major, labeling it impractical compared to Lisa's more sensible path toward becoming a wedding coordinator, which he funded without question while scrutinizing every dime I requested for textbooks or software, I had come to view the silence as a necessary shield, preserving my hard-won autonomy from his meddlesome oversight and the constant comparisons that positioned my younger sister as the flawless achiever who never rocked the boat, the one who received extra praise for her engagement to Mark, a reliable sales representative from our hometown whose steady job aligned perfectly with Dad's vision of success, whereas my pursuits in data analysis and digital strategy were dismissed as fleeting hobbies unfit for a woman building a family legacy. As the call dragged on with him reiterating the consequences of my potential absence, painting vivid pictures of how my decision would disappoint not just him, but the entire extended family gathering for the rustic barn ceremony outside Columbus, I murmured agreements and assurances that I would rearrange my schedule accordingly, my voice laced with the feigned deference he expected, all the while my mind raced ahead to the manila envelope tucked away in the top drawer of my oak desk, a carefully curated dossier containing photocopies of my diploma bearing the dean's commendation, detailed pay statements highlighting the impressive annual earnings that dwarfed his own pension, and a concise letter articulating how I had independently shouldered the costs he believed he was still bearing, transforming what he saw as dependency into a testament of self-reliance that would undoubtedly upend his preconceptions in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Hanging up after promising to arrive on time, I leaned back against the cool leather of my office chair, the city skyline twinkling beyond the glass like a constellation of possibilities I had earned on my own terms, And a quiet chuckle escaped my lips at the thought of his reaction when the moment arrived, his usual composure cracking under the revelation, much like the time he had fumbled his cards during a high-stakes poker night upon learning of an unexpected tax hike. But beneath the humor simmered a deeper undercurrent of uncertainty, wondering whether this meticulously planned act of retribution would finally command the respect I craved or merely widen the chasm of misunderstanding that had defined our relationship for so long, especially with Lisa's social media posts flooding my feed, her excited updates about the venue's enchanted garden setting and the custom invitations featuring elegant calligraphy serving as subtle reminders of the spotlight she so effortlessly commanded, prompting me to scroll through them with a mix of fondness and frustration before closing the app and pulling out my suitcase to begin packing, deliberately placing the envelope at the very top where it would be within easy reach during the drive. A silent vow that my attendance would not signify submission, but rather the prelude to a confrontation that promised to shake the foundations of our family dynamics right at the heart of what was supposed to be a celebration of unity and new beginnings. The interstate hummed beneath my tires as I navigated the familiar route from Chicago toward the rolling hills of rural Ohio, where the landscape gradually shifted from urban sprawl to endless fields of corn swaying under a sky heavy with the promise of autumn rain, and with each passing mile, my thoughts inevitably wandered back to the intricate web of manipulations that had defined my interactions with Dad over the years, those subtle yet persistent tactics he employed to maintain his grip on our family narrative, such as the instance during my junior year of college when he had delayed sending my tuition check by 2 weeks until I committed to hosting Thanksgiving dinner at his insistence, turning what should have been a simple holiday into a showcase for his role as the unwavering provider, while I juggled assignments and part-time shifts that he dismissed as distractions from more practical pursuits. I had grown accustomed to these power plays, viewing them as outdated relics of his factory floor mentality where authority was earned through endurance rather than innovation, yet they still stung when layered with the secret I carried like an invisible backpack. The one encompassing not just my early graduation, but also the string of high-stakes consulting contracts that had begun trickling in during my final semester. Late-night deals negotiated over encrypted video calls with executives in New York and San Francisco that netted bonuses substantial enough to fund a weekend getaway to the Smoky Mountains last spring, a solo trip I attributed to a school grant when Mom inquired during one of her rare check-in texts, preserving the illusion of a struggling student scraping by on ramen and determination. As the radio station faded into static, forcing me to switch to a podcast on entrepreneurial mindsets that ironically echoed my own trajectory, a wry amusement bubbled up at the contrast between the host's tales of bootstrapped success and Dad's worldview, where true achievement meant a gold watch after 30 years of clocking in at the same plant, a path Lisa had eagerly embraced by aligning herself with Mark's corporate ladder climb. Their engagement announcement last year met with Dad's enthusiastic toast at the local diner about building a legacy through stability rather than what he called my pie-in-the-sky digital dreams, leaving me to nod along while mentally calculating how my latest project payout had just cleared 5 figures in under 2 months. The call from Lisa interrupted this reverie midway through Indiana, her number popping up on the dashboard display with a photo of her beaming in a sundress from their last vacation. And I accepted the Bluetooth connection with a forced cheerfulness that masked the undercurrent of rivalry simmering since childhood, when she would commandeer the family computer for hours on end crafting digital scrapbooks while I waited patiently, only to receive Dad's approval for her creativity over my coding experiments that he deemed too solitary for a social butterfly like her. She launched into an animated rundown of the wedding logistics, from the farm-to-table menu featuring locally sourced heirloom tomatoes to the live band that would play classics from their parents' era. But soon the conversation veered into familiar territory as she teased me about my perpetual student life, wondering aloud if I had packed anything presentable or if I planned to show up in my usual jeans and hoodie, her laughter tinkling through the speakers like wind chimes in a breeze that carried just enough condescension to tighten my jaw, prompting me to counter with a lighthearted quip about how my wardrobe choices prioritize function over frills, since I spent more time buried in spreadsheets than bridal magazines. A deflection that kept the exchange civil even as it highlighted the chasm between our realities. Hers a whirlwind of Pinterest boards and vendor meetings funded by Dad's generous checks. Mine a quiet empire built on algorithms and autonomy that afforded me the flexibility to work from anywhere, including the cozy coffee shop near my apartment where I had sealed a partnership deal just yesterday afternoon. The rail jolt came toward the end of the call, however, when she let slip a detail she probably assumed I already knew, mentioning in passing how Dad had confided in her during a recent father-daughter lunch about restructuring the family inheritance to favor her future household, citing the old Dayton house and its equity as a nest egg for her and Mark's eventual children, reasoning that my nomadic student existence made me an unreliable steward for such assets, a twist that landed like a curveball in the quiet confines of my car, igniting a fresh wave of resentment because it not only undervalued the stability I had forged in secret, but also echoed the biases he had voiced at my high school graduation, praising Lisa's art club awards while glossing over my perfect scores in math and science, and as I gripped the wheel tighter, navigating a sudden downpour that blurred the windshield wiper's rhythm, I felt the envelope in the passenger seat bag pulse with potential, its contents a clever antidote to his assumptions that would force a reckoning on the very soil where our family roots ran deepest. Pulling off at the state line rest area to stretch my legs and grab a soda from the vending machine, the cool air carrying sense of damp earth and distant bonfires, I allowed a moment of humorous reflection on the absurdity of it all, picturing Dad's face contorting like a poorly folded roadmap upon discovering the truth, but the levity faded as uncertainty crept in, questioning whether unveiling my achievements would dismantle his favoritism or merely provoke a defensive backlash that entangled Lisa further in the crossfire, especially with the venue now only an hour away where relatives would converge like threads in a tapestry woven from half-truths and unspoken grievances. As I merged back onto the highway, the sun breaking through clouds to cast long shadows over the farmland, my pulse quickened at the sight of the first welcome sign for the Columbus outskirts, and upon easing into the gravel lot of the bed and breakfast recommended for out-of-town guests, the murmur of voices drew me toward the porch where Dad stood amidst a knot of aunts and uncles, his laughter booming until it sharpened into criticism as I approached unnoticed, his words carrying clearly on the breeze about how I remain the family disappointment, too wrapped up in my education to appreciate real commitments like Lisa's milestone, a revelation that rooted me in place and solidified my determination to let the weekend unfold on my terms. The envelope waiting like a loaded spring ready to propel the drama into uncharted territory. The rehearsal dinner commenced in the loft of that charming yet rustic barn venue under a canopy of soft, twinkling string lights that cast flickering shadows across the wooden beams and long communal tables laden with platters of artisanal cheeses, crusty breads, and seasonal salads dressed in vinaigrette that evoked the hearty farm suppers from my childhood summers spent visiting Dad's relatives in the countryside, where gatherings like this one always served as stages for unspoken competitions and the airing of minor grievances disguised as casual chit-chat, and as I ascended the creaky stairs after freshening up in my room at the adjacent bed and breakfast, the murmur of voices grew louder, pulling me into the fray where aunts, uncles, and distant cousins clustered in animated clusters, their laughter occasionally punctuating the air like fireworks at a county fair, while Lisa held court near the head table in her elegant rehearsal gown of pale lavender silk that hugged her figure. Just so, practicing her entrance with Mark by her side, his steady hand on her elbow a picture of supportive partnership that Dad had praised endlessly during the drive from the parking lot earlier that afternoon. I slipped into the periphery at first, selecting a seat toward the middle of the table to observe rather than dominate, my simple black dress and minimal jewelry a deliberate contrast to the floral ensembles swirling around me. But it did not take long for Aunt Karen, Dad's perceptive older sister with her signature bob haircut and no-nonsense gaze sharpened from years running a small accounting firm in Toledo, to zero in on me during a lull in the appetizers, her plate balanced precariously as she leaned over to inquire about my progress in school with a specificity that suggested she had been briefed on the family lore of my ongoing struggles. prompting me to weave a narrative of impending finals and the grind of group projects that demanded late hours in front of a screen. All while inwardly chuckling at the irony of how those very hours were now devoted to optimizing client databases for Fortune 500 companies rather than cramming for exams I had aced months ago. Her eyes, however, lingered on the subtle gleam of my earrings, a pair of pearl studs acquired as a self-reward after negotiating a particularly lucrative contract extension last quarter. And she commented with a raised eyebrow on how such accessories seemed a tad upscale for a student's budget strained by cafeteria meals and bus fares. A probing remark that I deflected with a humorous anecdote about scoring them at a vintage shop during a rare weekend off, likening the bargain to finding a diamond in a haystack, much like the venue's decor, which elicited a polite smile from her but left me wondering if her intuition had picked up on the discrepancies in my story. Especially since she had always been the one to call out Dad's exaggerations during holiday debates over politics and finances, her skepticism a potential ally in the brewing storm of revelations I planned to unleash. The evening's rhythm shifted when my phone buzzed discreetly in my purse, a notification from my boss outlining the details of an urgent promotion interview scheduled via video link for the following morning. A career leap that would elevate my role to senior consultant with responsibilities spanning international teams and a salary bump pushing me well into the higher six figures. Yet this opportunity clashed violently with the post-wedding brunch Dad had insisted I attend to mend any perceived slights, creating a dilemma that twisted in my gut like overripe fruit as I excused myself to the powder room to compose a response. The mirror reflecting a face flushed with the conflict of prioritizing family facade over professional momentum that had defined my independent ascent. Returning to the table, I nearly collided with Lisa, who pulled me into a semi-private alcove lined with wildflower arrangements, her expression a blend of bridal glow and underlying tension as she launched into an accusation that I had been dragging my feet with RSVPs and now carried an air of jealousy that threatened to overshadow her joy. Claiming my reserved demeanor came across as resentment toward her happiness with Mark, a charge that struck deep given the times I had covered for her impulsive decisions during her early 20s, like the weekend she vanished to a music festival without telling anyone, leaving me to fabricate excuses to Dad over the phone while she partied on, and in the heat of the exchange. I responded with a witty retort about how my envy was reserved for her ability to delegate stress to an army of planners while I managed chaos solo, a barb that diffused some tension with its self-deprecating humor but escalated the confrontation when nearby guests turned their heads, amplifying the whispers that rippled through the loft like wind through dry leaves. As toasts began with Uncle Joe regaling the crowd with embellished stories of his own nuptials from the Reagan era, complete with a botched cake cutting that left frosting on the best man's tuxedo and drew genuine belly laughs from even the most stoic attendees. I found a momentary alliance with Aunt Karen over shared plates, her quiet questions about my future plans allowing me to drop a subtle clue in the form of a business card that slipped from my wallet onto the tablecloth, emblazoned with my firm's logo and a title that read lead analyst rather than anything student-related, which she pocketed with a knowing nod after glancing at it, hinting at a budding partnership that could bolster my position amid the family's divided loyalties. The night's climax approached as Dad maneuvered through the dispersing crowd with purposeful strides, his face set in that familiar line of paternal authority forged from years of mediating labor disputes at the plant, and he cornered me near the dessert station where tiers of lemon tarts glistened under the lights, his voice low and insistent as he demanded a public apology to Lisa during the morning brunch to preserve the harmony of her special weekend. Insisting that my perceived slights were unforgivable lapses in family solidarity that he would not tolerate under the threat of revisiting his financial support, a command that ignited the fuse of my restrained fury even as I nodded outwardly. The envelope upstairs in my room now feeling like a loaded promise of witty reprisal, but the uncertainty loomed heavier with Lisa's earlier vulnerability echoing in my mind and the promotion's timeline ticking away, leaving me to retire to my bed that night with the weight of impending reckonings pressing down, only to be jarred awake by the faint sound of voices from the hallway. Lisa and Mark arguing in hushed tones about pre-wedding jitters and the pressures of expectation that mirrored my own concealed burdens far too closely for comfort. Sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains of the bed and breakfast's common room the next morning, casting a golden haze over the flurry of activity as bridesmaids and family members darted about with garment bags slung over shoulders and coffee mugs clutched in hands. The air thick with the scent of fresh scones from the continental breakfast and the underlying tension of a day poised on the edge of matrimonial bliss, where every minor hiccup threatened to unravel the meticulously planned schedule that Lisa had poured over for months, and I lingered at the periphery nursing a steaming cup of black coffee, my mind still replaying the hushed argument I had overheard between her and Mark late into the night, their voices laced with doubts about financial strains and the weight of family expectations that echoed my own concealed pressures far more than I cared to admit, prompting a fleeting pang of empathy that warred with the resolve fueling my secret agenda. The chaos escalated quickly when the florist arrived unannounced with crates of mismatched blooms, delivering lilies in place of the peonies Lisa had specified for her bouquet and centerpieces, a substitution that sent her into a controlled frenzy as she rifled through the petals with gloved hands, declaring the error a catastrophe that clashed with her vision of soft pastels and rustic elegance. While Mark hovered nearby offering placating words about improvising with what they had, a scene that drew unintended humor from the absurdity of it all, reminding me of the time in our teenage years when Lisa had thrown a fit over a rained-out school dance, demanding Dad drive an hour to fetch an alternative dress, only for the event to end early anyway. And I stifled a chuckle behind my mug as one bridesmaid accidentally knocked over a vase in the commotion, sending water cascading across the hardwood floor like a comedic waterfall that soaked Uncle Joe's socks before anyone could react. Amid the mop-up efforts, my cousin Sarah approached with her usual air of self-appointed mediator, the one who had sided with Dad in every family squabble since we were kids playing in the backyard. Her questions about my plans post-graduation laced with that patronizing tone suggesting I needed guidance on settling down like Lisa, and when she pressed about whether I had considered Mark's colleague for a date to broaden my horizons, I snapped back without filtering my frustration, retorting that my romantic life was none of her concern and certainly not fodder for her matchmaking schemes amid someone else's wedding preparations. A sharp exchange that left her gaping and retreating to whisper with a cluster of ants, their sidelong glances painting me as the disruptive force in this harmonious gathering. A choice that isolated me further and invited the very disapproval I had long anticipated from those who viewed Dad's control as benevolent tradition rather than stifling overreach. As the group dispersed toward the venue for final setups, I retreated to a quiet corner of the garden patio to check my phone, the screen lighting up with emails confirming the finer points of my promotion package, including relocation stipulations to Austin that would sever ties to the Midwest roots Dad held so dear, subtle clues to my evolving independence that I archived quickly before Aunt Karen could wander by and probe deeper, her earlier curiosity about the business card now compounded by the sleek device in my hand that screamed professional polish over student austerity, and though I pocketed it with a casual smile when she waved from afar, the internal conflict churned, weighing the thrill of career advancement against the impending family fallout that my envelope's contents promised to ignite. The private confrontation with Dad unfolded later in the afternoon shade of an old oak tree near the barn's entrance, where he had pulled me aside after spotting me alone with a clipboard of vendor lists borrowed from Lisa, his expression thunderous as he reiterated the demand for my apology at the luncheon, doubling down on his leverage by alluding to how my ingratitude not only strained his wallet but undermined the family unit he had toiled to build through overtime shifts and sacrificed vacations, his voice rising with the fervor of a man defending his legacy against an unseen threat, and in that heated moment, I felt the witty seeds of revenge take root, slipping a folded note into his shirt pocket during a feigned hug of reconciliation, the paper inscribed with a cryptic line about surprises lurking in plain sight that would challenge his every assumption, a teaser designed to gnaw at his composure without spoiling the full impact. leaving him to pat the spot absently as he stormed off muttering about respect and priorities. The pre-ceremony luncheon brought a brief respite with plates of grilled chicken salads and fruit compotes passed around under a tent fluttering in the breeze, but tension simmered beneath the surface conversations, especially when Sarah rallied a few relatives to subtly confront me about my earlier outburst, their united front framing my independence as selfishness that disrupted Lisa's joy. A narrative that made me bristle and respond with measured defiance, choosing to stand my ground rather than capitulate and risk diluting the potency of my planned revelation, even as it deepened the rift and elicited sympathetic nods toward the bride to be, who circulated with forced smiles. As the afternoon waned and guests began arriving in waves of pressed suits and summer dresses, the barn transforming with rows of white chairs aligned on fresh hay and aisles lined with lanterns that promised an enchanted twilight glow. A sudden cry from the bridal suite shattered the mounting anticipation, Lisa's veil snagging irreparably on an antique dresser during her final adjustments, the delicate lace tearing in a way that demanded immediate intervention and thrusting me unwillingly into the spotlight as the only one with steady hands and a calm demeanor to attempt repairs, positioning me front and center just as Dad's expectant gaze swept the assembling crowd. The envelope now transferred to my small clutch like a heartbeat, echoing the uncertainty of whether this forced involvement would accelerate my revenge or entangle me in the very dynamics I sought to dismantle. The strains of the organ music filled the barn with a resonant timbre that seemed to vibrate through the wooden rafters and settle over the assembled guests like a veil of expectant hush. As the procession commenced with flower girls scattering rose petals in delicate arcs along the hay-strewn aisle, their tiny baskets swinging gently while Lisa emerged from the side entrance on Mark's arm, her gown flowing in soft waves of ivory lace that caught the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the high windows, transforming the rustic space into a scene straight out of one of those heartwarming Midwestern wedding magazines Dad used to leave scattered on the coffee table back home, and I positioned myself among the bridesmaids just off to the side, my hands clasped tightly around the small clutch containing the envelope that had become an extension of my resolve, its weight a constant reminder of the revelations poised to disrupt this carefully curated moment of familial triumph he had orchestrated to affirm his role as the pillar of stability amid the uncertainties of modern life. As the officiant began the ceremony with readings from Corinthians about love enduring all things, the words washing over the crowd in a rhythmic cadence that prompted sniffles from Aunt Karen and nods of approval from Uncle Joe. My gaze locked onto Dad in the front row, his posture straight and proud in his rented tuxedo, the cryptic note I had slipped him earlier probably dismissed as one of my quirky gestures rather than the harbinger it truly was. And with the exchange of vows drawing near, I felt a surge of that witty anticipation mixed with the sharp edge of uncertainty, wondering if the satisfaction of appending his narrative would outweigh the potential fallout in a family already frayed by years of favoritism and unvoiced resentments that had simmered like a pot left too long on the stove. Midway through the homily, as the officiant paused to invite personal blessings from the family, I seized the interlude created by the earlier veil mishap that had drawn me closer to the altar for adjustments, stepping forward with purposeful grace to approach Dad under the pretense of sharing a quiet word of support. My voice a murmur lost in the ambient rustle as I pressed the manila envelope into his calloused palm, whispering that this was my contribution to the day's joy, a gift born from the truths he had overlooked. And his initial bemusement shifted to intrigue as he tore open the seal with trembling fingers, the first page revealing my diploma with its gold-embossed honors seal from the university he had assumed I was still navigating, followed by the pay stubs detailing a six-figure income derived from consulting gigs that had flourished in the shadows of his tuition checks, numbers that leaped out like accusations of misplaced trust, causing his hands to shake visibly as color drained from his weathered face, the papers rustling audibly enough to draw curious glances from nearby relatives while the ceremony faltered into an awkward hush. Murmurs spread like wildfire through the seats as he scanned the accompanying letter outlining my self-funded path and the recent job offer from a firm in Austin that promised even greater autonomy, along with a relocation clause severing ties to the Midwest. A twist that amplified the shock by underscoring how his ultimatums had unknowingly propelled me toward independence rather than dependence, and Lisa turned from her position at the altar, her eyes widening in a blend of astonishment and hurt that mirrored the vulnerability she had confessed to me earlier, prompting a ripple of whispers that questioned the authenticity of the family portrait Dad had painted for years. With Sarah's mouth agape and even Mark pausing mid-vow to process the unfolding drama that transformed the wedding into an unintended confessional. Yet the revelation deepened with Dad's hoarse admission pulled me aside during the brief recessional delay, his voice cracking as he confessed to hidden debts accumulated from covering Mom's lingering medical expenses after her passing, bills he had concealed to maintain the image of provider extraordinaire. A burden that my secret success could have alleviated had he not wielded finances as weapons, tying my achievements unwittingly to the very fractures he sought to hide and forcing me to confront the irony that my revenge, while cleverly timed to shatter his control, exposed our shared vulnerabilities in a way that blurred the lines between victor and victim, especially as Lisa approached with tears streaking her makeup, squeezing my arm to reveal her own secret of uncertainties about the unexpected pregnancy she and Mark were navigating in silence, doubts that made her bridal glow feel like a fragile mask rather than unassailable happiness. The reception that followed unfolded in a haze of clinking glasses and half-hearted dances under the strung lights, where congratulations mingled uneasily with probing questions about my concealed life, Aunt Karen offering a subtle nod of solidarity that hinted at her long-suspected truths, but Dad's gaze lingered on me with a mix of newfound respect and wounded pride, admitting in a quiet corner near the dessert table that his threats stemmed from fear of irrelevance in a daughter's world he could no longer dominate, a confession that softened the edges of my satisfaction yet left the air thick with unresolved tensions, as relatives debated the implications in hushed tones that questioned whether my choices had empowered or alienated, and as I slipped away during the bouquet toss to contemplate the Austin horizon glowing on my phone screen, the envelope now discarded like shed skin, I pondered if this truth would eventually mend the rifts through honest reckoning or haunt us with the what-ifs of paths not shared, walking into the twilight with the family legacy hanging in ambiguous limbo, a thought-provoking echo that lingered long after the last notes of the band faded into the night.